Well, it's been a while. Here we are still at my home office. I'm Tracey Welson-Rossman, Chief Marketing Officer of Chariot Solutions. And with me today is Aaron Mulder, who is the Chief Technology of Chariot. And we are going to talk about this new company that we started called Journal My Health, which is honestly now a separate company from Chariot, but Chariot's been our development arm to get this product out. And one of the things that has been really, the complimentary remarks that I've gotten from people has been around our ability to have gotten the product out very quickly into the App Store. So we're going to talk a little bit about the technical choices that were made to make that happen, and then some of the future issues that we are going to have to think about as the product matures and we start to scale a little bit. So Aaron, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the choices that were made as we wanted to get Journal My Health into production.
Sure, and I think the place to start is, when we first had this idea, and it was easy to kind of sketch it out on paper, but we didn't really know whether it was going to be successful in the marketplace. And it seemed like the only way to tell that was to get the product in people's hands. You could talk about it all you want, but until people are using it, we didn't know whether there would be adoption or whether, it was something really only of interest to us and a very limited number of people.
And I think we should also just talk that we had limited budget. So I think that that's an important discussion. We're just like a regular startup. We're not sitting with a pile of cash that we can work with. So, and I believe in failing fast.
And so it seemed like the thing to do was get something to the App Store as quickly as possible. And that meant that maybe we weren't building this in the same way we would approach a mature product. Instead, everything was oriented around, how can we get there quickly? At least to get far enough that, we can put it out in the marketplace and say, are there legs here? Is this something we want to carry forward, maybe with a different approach or whatever? But until you get it out there, there's nothing you can do. So the first decision was to go with an iOS product, and then we looked at the APIs available and chose to go with Swift UI, which is a newer API for building screens in iOS, but it's more limited than the traditional iOS user interfaces. There are features that are just not available or not available without complex workarounds. There are some things that work in kind of odd ways, but it is very quick to build. It was very easy to churn out, all the screens we needed for the app. And so that's a decision we made, again, because of the timing. It has some limitations in which versions of iOS it supports. Some of the features we wanted to use and some of the bugs we wanted to avoid dictated that we could only be on the very most current version of iOS. And that's not usually our policy. Usually we go at least 2 versions. But again, if we have to restrict ourselves to only the market of iOS people who have upgraded their phones, that's still enough to tell us, whether there's interest in this product or not. And then we can revisit that decision later, potentially. So Swift UI let us build the screens very quickly, but we had to accommodate its limitations. And kind of related to that, we weren't able to approach the screens as let's design anything. It wasn't completely a green field, anything goes. Instead, we were limited by what we could do quickly. So there were cases where the visual designer came up with some concepts and, we had to say, listen, we can't do it like that, but we can do it like this. And, we just had a bit of a back and forth until we worked out, something that we could build quickly and that satisfied, the necessary visual design elements. I think one of the other one of the other decisions we made was to try to stick with out-of-the-box technology to whatever extent we could, not to bring in a bunch of third-party libraries. Again, that was a little limiting, but it was much easier to build and get approved and roll out with, a very small, tight stack of basically iOS technology. So that dictated our data storage. It dictated some of the user interface elements. At one point, we tried using a third-party user interface library to get some widgets we wanted, and it ended up not working that well. And rather than troubleshooting and working around within the context of that third-party code, we just rewrote something that worked for us and was quick to do. And again, it might not be the most maintainable thing in 3 years, so we may be back looking at third-party libraries again, but when the time comes, the time for that wasn't, the first couple of weeks when we're trying to punch something out the door. It's later when we decide this is the way we want to go and we have some breathing room and we can, revisit some of those decisions.
Do you feel, so I'm sitting on the product side, and we have our designer, our visual designer, and you're sitting on the back-end technical side. And I think sometimes when we work with clients, there's a tendency for the product owner or the founder of a startup to feel like they need to put everything in. And I really felt that our team was, maybe because of our experience, but when I would talk to Michael, our visual designer, we would say, okay, this is what we want, but we already had it in our heads that we knew that there was going to be compromise because we didn't always understand what it was going to take technically to get that up and running. So that was already in our thought process. So I think that made it easier for us to have the discussions with you. So, do you have any advice for, for startups, whether it's an internal project or, an actual, startup company, that to help navigate those two worlds from a compromise standpoint?
I do feel it's a little different if you're building an internal product for a company, because you probably come in with a budget and an expectation that whatever you're building is going to be used and there is an audience. And, you might choose up front to say, we know this product is going to be used within our company for the next 5 years or whatever the initial scope is. So we need to make the decisions that will be the smartest to carry us through that period. You may have a more restricted set of phones or devices you're trying to support. They're just different considerations, I think,
right,
for an internal product. This was more of a startup kind of thing where we didn't know it was going to be successful.
right.
We didn't know who the audience was going to end up being. And so that drove some of those decisions I was talking about. If we knew that we were building code that we were going to be maintaining 5 years later, we might have said, listen, let's take a couple extra months and
right,
use technologies that support a more diverse set of phones, or use an architecture that's going to be more maintainable down the road or whatever. But we were kind of in the position where if we didn't succeed in the next 3 months, there wasn't going to be a month 4, right?
right,
If we
exactly.
put something out there and no one cared. So there was no point in, building something very elaborate or very maintainable if it was going to make it harder to get, to the finish line, and there was no guarantee it was ever going to be used after that. So we took more of a 2-stage approach to say, we have to get to step 1 as quickly as possible, which is to get something out there. It's got to represent our vision. It's got to be something that people will benefit from, but it doesn't have to have every feature. It doesn't have to have every visual element in the most desirable form. It doesn't have to have, the widest support for devices or the most future proofing or whatever. It has to be there. We have to make something that we can put out. if we fast forward a year, it's possible some of those decisions will bite us. I wanted to say we're using Swift UI. It only supports iOS 14 and up. But now we're discovering that Swift UI in iOS 15 has some new features that we would like to take advantage of. But if we do, either we're writing more cumbersome code to say, if you're on this platform, do this, otherwise do that, or we advance our minimum, operating system requirement over time, and we're still not supporting, the last 2 generations of phones. So, there are some things that might be awkward, and there may be a time where we say, this is going to be successful. We know it is. Now we need to take, some number of months and just rewrite some of the core pieces. We need to revisit some of those decisions we made. And I think it's important to be willing to do that, or at least to have that conversation. We may sit down and say, here are the costs, here are the benefits. We're not going to rewrite it. We're going to keep going the way we are because it lets us be nimble and, make changes quickly. And we value that more than a wider device support or whatever, or maybe we don't.
Yeah. And I think those are important conversations for both sides to have, and coming from, more of the business side, to have an understanding of what the pros and cons are for the technical decisions that are being made. I think it's important to, understand why we're going down a certain path. Now we're about to go to, I would call it, V11. Hopefully, in the next 2 weeks. It's probably still too soon to have some of these, further reaching conversations. We're still in that arena of, we made it into month 4, which I think is pretty good. But, I think we still have a little more time to have a discussion about like, what's the future. And I think, sometimes it's hard to have those conversations because it seems like, oh, you don't believe in your product. And I think we do believe in the product. And by making decisions that allow us to be nimble at this stage of our life, of the life cycle of the product, I think that, to me, is very helpful. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so one example is when we launched, everyone was effectively anonymous. You put your first name into the app, but we didn't collect your full name, your email address, anything like that. And now we're having some discussions between business and technology of, should we move to a system with a login and a password and an account where we know who you are, but you have the ability to then throw your phone away and go to some other device and sign into your same account again and still have your data there. There are workarounds we might put in. We can sync to iCloud without knowing your email address. But now we have this decision to make. Is anonymity more important, or is portability of your data more important, or security more important? And that's the kind of decision we'd like to make based on where our users want to go with this.
Right.
And it has architecture impacts. And if we knew the answers up front, we would have designed around that, but we didn't. And we needed to get to the users so we could have the discussion, so we could make that decision, right? So we're really in a case where we still need flexibility. But, I think we have to be in agreement that there will be a time down the road where we have to make some hard decisions about the architecture and revisit some of the past decisions, because we don't want to be in that position where our MVP became the product without anyone noticing, and suddenly it was too hard to change, and we're stuck with a lot of baggage and bad decisions from years ago or something like that. We'll have to just see where we are, see where we're going, and make these decisions about, do we tweak things, or do we throw some things away and rebuild, or with all these costs and benefits in mind, like, what's the best way to go? And even if the decision is we're going to stick with our MVP and just keep building on it, fine, but at least it's intentional. It's not like we accidentally fell into a trap or something.
I think that's a really good point that you're bringing up, which, I hear this from, a lot of founders. that, all of a sudden they now are faced with these huge technology challenges because they weren't intentional about how they were building, and maybe they didn't really have an understanding of the choices that they were making. So I'm pretty happy with the way that our team is functioning in terms of the give and take and the discussions that we're having. And I'm learning a ton right now in terms of product build. So it would be great if we can have some of these discussions every couple of months as we make progress. I think there's a lot to be learned here. And as I said, I'm learning a lot. It doesn't matter how many years you've been in the business. There's just so many parts and pieces, and technology changes so much. But there has to be this marriage between understanding what technology can do for you, but also, what your customers want, working within the dollars that you have to spend. And I think not making assumptions too. So it is a challenge, but it's been fun so far.
Yeah, and I think the biggest takeaway is to be intentional and to say,
Yeah, I
this
like
is
that.
where we have to get first. This is where we want to go next. These are some of the places where we have to take stock, and there may be changes that we decide we need to make. This is the time period where we don't really know where our product is going. And then that will be the time period where we've secured all the feedback we need to really commit to a direction big time. Just being aware that those decisions and phases are out there, I think lets us make the right technology decisions. And there's some flowing back from technology too. One of the decisions we made has ended up being behind a number of the crashes we've seen in reports from the App Store. There aren't that many, but a lot of the ones we do get are from one decision we made. So we may want to revisit that and just find an opportune time. But again, it was one of the things that got us to where we are. So it's not that it was wrong. It's just that, it's a decision we made for good reasons, and we may want to revisit later for good reasons as well.
Right. So I think, what I'm hearing is there's a bit of humbleness that has to be in these, discussions of understanding, a decision was made. It's not perfect. We're going to do what we can, but we have to look at it and understand that things will need to change at some point. And we have to be, open to these discussions and willing to have these discussions, and not feel like, oh, that was just so, we're going to make mistakes too, as in all phases of this. So,
and find the right time to have those discussions.
Right. Unless there's like some major thing going on, you want to have these discussions and have an understanding. And I think that's the only other I think lesson besides intentionality that we can maybe offer up to the audience is, I really feel lucky that you're able to explain why we're doing what we're doing, so that I have a better understanding. And certainly that discussion that we had around portability and the user setup, when you started explaining it, I was like, this is Pandora's box. We need to put this aside because it's going to take too much time at this moment. And I know that I'm losing things right now, but speed to market to me was more important.
Sure.
So having that understanding, I felt that I was able to make a more informed decision, in terms of direction of the product. And we're ready to have that Pandora's box discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've gotten to the point where we can, take a bit of a breather because we have a product in the market. I don't think we're to the point yet where we know what it's going to look like in 2 years.
No.
But, every step along the way, we get to make somewhat better decisions based on how far we've gotten so far.
Exactly. Well, Aaron, thank you for your time. It's always great to have you explain things. Seriously, I'm not joking. Like this is, it's really, it's helped me become, I think, a better technologist, as I'm out there talking to other founders as well to help them navigate when they're not the people who are implementing the technology. So I think it's really important to have that working relationship to create the better product and create the best decisions.
It's been great to see the product get out in the market
I
and
know.
get some traction.
I know. So thank you. And we'll be back. Hopefully this will help several people out there as they go along their startup journey.
Sounds great.